Right, now this is the, doing this in reverse order actually, this is the very beginning of this particular video. I'll leave a link to this video below. It'd be interesting to see if Dolan complains about this one. But normally, of late, he's been starting his videos with his wife, bit of jovial banter, a bit of kidding around. And no jovial banter on this one. He's looking quite serious. As though, people have been a little bit critical of his ET crash retrieval claims. As they should be, because there's not a shred of tangible evidence for one single ET crash retrieval. The whole thing is nonsense. Now, I don't think Richard Dolan's an idiot. I think he's quite a smart guy, but that doesn't mean he's not gullible. He may very well believe what he's saying. Now, I'm not totally convinced that he does. I think he may very well just be doing this to keep himself on the talk circuit. He might enjoy a little bit of sort of micro fame. But most of the people that swallow all this sort of stuff hook, line and sinker without looking for any evidence, they're not very good researchers for a start. But most of them are gullible fools. They'll just swallow anything. Now, I'm not sure. I don't think Richard Dolan is a fool. I think he's quite a smart guy. So I think he must know that there is not a shred of evidence to any of this, and he must know that what he's doing is repeating hearsay and telling people he believes it. Okay, well, you don't have to believe it, of course. I certainly don't believe it. But anyway, here's Richard Dolan. Start of this video, there's no jovial banter with the wife. He's looking a bit serious. I think he's heard that people are being a little bit critical of him and what he's been saying about his ET crash retrievals.
Hello, I'm Richard Dolan, and welcome to the latest installment of UFOs The Big Picture. I'd like quickly... UFOs The Big Picture. That's quite interesting because there isn't really a big picture with regard to UFOs. Nothing's happening, is it? Most of this stuff is all referenced from 1947 and years, decades ago. Nothing is happening. Everyone's got a camera on them these days, or running around with iPhones, and there's nothing convincing. I've seen absolutely nothing convincing. I've certainly seen nothing to do with crash retrievals. Okay. Anyway, I think he actually says that he feels the need to sort of reinforce what he said in his last video about ET crash retrievals. To mention that I now have a weekly newsletter, so if you want to keep track of what I'm up to, it's an easy way to get free weekly updates. I'd certainly recommend.
Free weekly updates. A weekly newsletter. Now, as there's absolutely nothing whatsoever going on, it might be interesting to just subscribe to this to see what's in it. I'll be quite curious to see what's in it. A weekly update of stuff that was going on 50 years ago, possibly.
And then you give it a try. Now, I've talked recently about UFO crash retrievals on...
Yes, he has, and he feels that he needs to bolster what he said. Now, look at the, he's looking quite serious here. I'm Richard Dolan, I want you to believe me. I need to bolster, what I said before. There's no joviality here. He's, I think he's a bit on the back foot here. He feels the need to bolster what he said. Still offers not a shred of tangible evidence, of course, to support even one crash retrieval, but okay, Richard, let's hear some of these fanciful yarns.
This live stream. But I think it's a good idea to revisit and deepen some of the things I've discussed before, and that's because there's a truly impressive amount of information and testimony out there. This time I want to provide testimony.
Yeah, but that's meaningless, Impressive testimony. It's testimony that Richard thinks is impressive. I think a serious researcher, well, when you're talking about something as fantastic as aliens visiting the planet, alien craft crashing, alien bodies being recovered, testimony doesn't cut it.
It is so fantastic that it has to be seen and felt and smelt and tasted to be believed. It's as simple as that. You need tangible evidence. Otherwise, it's just fanciful yarns.
Testimony via sources that have very high social standing in our society.
Completely meaningless.
Some of the people are former senators.
Senators, politicians, professional liars, corporate psychopaths.
Some were leading top generals. Other
Yeah, again, top generals with a bust of themselves in their house. Narcissistic psychopaths. Colonel Corso's book, absolute rubbish, complete fabrication, all the ET-related stuff. Colonel Cooper, happy to tell yarns about this flying saucer. Somebody told him the flying saucer story and he repeats it, only with him in it. Completely meaningless.
Others were a famous astronaut. Others were prominent.
Others were a famous astronaut. You mean another was a famous astronaut? Others were famous astronauts, possibly. But, yeah. Okay, well, I know he's not English, but that's terrible English, really, isn't it?
Defense executives. All of them provided very interesting information about the existence of crash UFOs and of programs designed to study the technology and alien bodies associated with them. Keep in mind these stories, maybe...
Little Freudian slip there, eh, Richard? These stories. Oh, yeah, but he's pretty sharp, Richard. He's on it straight away. This is a fast recovery.
We can call them quiet leaks.
These stories, you can see him blink. He blinks his eyes there. Maybe we should call them quiet leaks. No, I think he knows their stories. You know their stories, don't you, Richard? Because that's all they are. They're just stories.
Been coming out for over 50 years.
Again, meaningless. So what? People have been telling science fiction stories for decades, So what?
Now, even though they go back to the 1950s and 60s, it wasn't until the late 1970s that a large number of them began to appear in public.
Yeah, that was because people found that they could make money out of it. There was quite a bit of interest in it. That's why the yarns became more frequent and more fanciful, because people realised they could make money out of it. And I think George Knapp says, we'll tell you as much. He didn't realise there was so much interest in it that he took it up because he realised he could make money out of it.
The researcher Leonard Stringfield published a book back in 1977 called Situation Red, the UFO Siege.
Yeah. Yeah. The UFO siege. Yeah, okay. Have you ever been under siege by UFOs, alien spacecraft? You go to get your car out of the garage and you can't because there's a flying saucer in the driveway. You're under siege. Go and see a movie, you come out, and again, the sky's full of alien spacecraft because the cinema is under siege. Absolute twaddle, of course. Nonsense.
It was the first serious book on UFOs that discussed crash retrievals in a serious way. Stringfield's mentioning of such stories was brief, but it was enough to get the attention of quite a few people who had stories of their own. And after that book came out, many of them flocked to him quietly to give him their own account.
Yeah, people do that because they want their account in a book. They've seen this Stringfellow, was his name. They've seen his book and they would like to get their fanciful yarn into a book. So they go and tell him all this bloody science fiction nonsense. It's this is really disappointing because there's no one really in the UFO business, and that's what it is. That's worth listening to. There are no serious UFO researchers. There just aren't. They may start off that way, but they end up going down the same slippery slope, and then because they get a bit of micro fame, they go around the world doing lectures on all this stuff. They repeat all these science fiction tales as though they're truths. As I said earlier, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for an alien spacecraft to come here and crash. The technology will be beyond our imagination. Certainly the sort of craft that are being described aren't going to be on their own. Far too small to travel around the galaxy on their own. So the mothership would have, something, a retrieval vehicle, maybe 2 or 3 of them. Just in the unlikely event that one of their scout craft did come a cropper, they'd come and retrieve it, and they would also have the technology to prevent anybody from preventing that retrieval. They're not going to leave technology and biology with a developing species to analyse. It's just preposterous nonsense.
These included stories not only of UFO crash retrievals, but sometimes of people who had seen dead alien bodies.
Yeah, that's right. And there's stories. Again, he's using the word stories yet again. There's stories of alien spacecraft retrievals and alien body retrievals. They're science fiction stories. Not a shred of tangible evidence to back any of this up. Not one shred to back up one single story.
Things like that. The stories that Stringfield collected were, nothing short of astonishing, in my opinion. He was able to investigate a lot of them.
Okay, so this one guy investigated a lot of these stories. So these these stories that have been told to people are then told to this other guy that then puts them in his book, which he wants to sell, of course. Richard reads the book and likes the stories. So he laps all this stuff up, and he tells us that he thinks there's something to it because there's so many stories that are similar. Yeah. No, it's just not. It's not good enough, is it? Really, it's not good enough. I think it's a shame, but I think we can put a line through Richard Dolan. I thought he was on a slippery slope when he appeared on a panel with Corey Good. My goodness, I couldn't believe it. And now he's jumped on the 9/11 truth bandwagon. Really, Richard? It's scraping the barrel. I'd put a line through Richard Dolan. He's just not worth listening to. It's a shame, but that's the way it is.
He was unable to investigate some of them, but he always used his best judgment and common sense to evaluate them.
Yeah, well, so he told you, Richard. That's what he told you. For all you know, every story in that book could be a complete fabrication. For all Dolan knows, every story in that book could be a complete fabrication. The author could have just made it all up. The people might not even exist.
And overall, I think they tell a very consistent story.
And that might account for it, mightn't it?
One interesting story came to him through a fellow researcher named Charles Wilhelm. As an adolescent or teenager in 1959, Wilhelm listened to a deathbed confession from a neighbor whose long...
So he was a teenager, he listened to a deathbed confession from a neighbour.
He used to cut. This woman was dying of cancer. And she told him that she had once held a top security clearance at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that she had seen 2 saucer-shaped craft in a secret hangar.
Yeah, I really wouldn't give any credibility whatsoever to any deathbed confessions. People that are dying of old age, certainly. You can talk absolute bloody drivel, can't they? Anything that's on their mind, if they're interested in that sort of thing, assuming there's any truth to this at all, which I seriously doubt, because you're taking the word of a teenager. He was 15 years old, and he's telling a story of an elderly neighbour that told him a story. And then the 15-year-old kid has told as an adult, has told the book author this story, and the book author has printed it. Yeah, it's just, it's not good enough. It's ridiculous.
One craft was intact, the other was damaged.
You see, Richard is sort of moving his head from side to side. He's got his, I'm Richard Dolan, believe me face on. Give me credibility, take me seriously. But yeah, sorry, Richard. If you actually listen to what Richard Dolan is saying, it's nonsense. It's rubbish. It's not worth listening to.
She also knew of 2 small creatures, she said, preserved inside another secret building.
Yeah, they were probably poodles that she used to have. That she had stuffed and mounted, and they're on top of the piano. Okay, I don't think I could endure too much more of this, but I'll let it run on a little bit longer.
And had personally handled the paperwork on their autopsy report.
No copies of that, of course.
What she said to this young teenage neighbor of hers was, "Uncle Sam can't do anything to me after I'm in the grave." Charles Wilhelm related actually another story to Stringfield, somewhat of a similar story, a little bit less detail.
Well, yeah, okay. So he's got another story as well. This guy. Okay. Well, what's the other story?
It was something that he had been told in 1960s.
Oh, so he's been told this one. He's not gone to someone's deathbed and heard it. This is something he's been told, that he's then told the author.
By a friend whose
by a friend whose father's sister's uncle's second cousin 3 times removed saw a bright light in the sky. Yes, and then the next person gets told to the next person, and it's a landed UFO. Landed alien spacecraft. Then it gets told to the next person, landed alien spacecraft with aliens around it. And it gets told to the next person, it's a crashed alien spacecraft with dead aliens that was taken away by the government. You know, these stories go from person to person to person, and they get more and more embellished. Yeah, I mean, this is just ridiculous twaddle.
Father had worked with Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it was nearly identical to what his dying neighbor had told him. On the father's deathbed, he had told his son that he had seen 2 disc-shaped craft, 1 intact, 1 damaged, along with 4 preserved small alien bodies packed in chemicals. Now, there are a few of these stories that Stringfield had collected back in the 60s.
According to Stringfield, yeah. Yeah, according to Stringfield, there are all of these stories. They're all these stories are filtered through one guy, the guy that wrote the book, remember?
But this was just a tiny tip of the iceberg compared with what he collected after he published Situation Red.
Yeah, well, of course, because as soon as he published it, lots of these bloody fantasists and idiots came out of the woodwork and fed him all kinds of bloody rubbish. He probably wrote it up in another book because people bought the previous book, and he thought he'd made another pile of money out of another book, and he didn't care whether what was in it was laughable or not. Just a book of science fiction tales.
They came in dozens and then scores of them at a time. One source...
Yeah, there's dozens and there's scores of them, but of these stories. But remember, not one shred of tangible evidence. All these stories... I mean, I could say that, I used to work for the government on a secret alien reverse engineering alien spacecraft for BAE Systems. You know, and I used to there's a huge hangar at Boscombe Down, which is the UK's equivalent of Area 51, and they're reverse engineering an alien spacecraft there. And I worked on some of the systems, you know. Anybody can say that. It's meaningless rubbish.
Of Stringfield said that the U.S. military was designing a radar system to detect UFOs, and that...
Yeah, good luck with that. I mean, alien technology would be beyond our imagination. If they didn't want us to detect them, we wouldn't be able to detect them. Radar's not going to be able to detect them. It's as simple as that. This is just the sort of thing you see in science fiction films.
Navy nuclear submarines were equipped with instruments to detect submerged UFOs. Another
Submerged UFOs. Well, you know, might not necessarily be a UFO if it's underwater, might it? You know, might just be another submarine. And you're certainly going to have systems for detecting those. And some of those might be reasonably exotic. I think you know, they don't only use acoustics these days. I think they're using sort of various frequency lasers to try and find things in, you know, sort of submerged vessels or submerged vehicles. Doesn't mean they're alien spacecraft, does it?
Related retrieval of a crash UFO somewhere in the American Southwest in 1957.
See, another one, you know, 1957, you know, the American Southwest. All these crashes always occur in remote areas, don't they? You know, they're in New Mexico, in the desert. You know, they never crash at a football stadium or the high street, you know, national park. You know, where there's loads of people having fun, having picnics. You know, loads of people around where they can take pictures and, you know, talk to the news crew that are bound to turn up. It's always in a desolate location where no one can see it. You have to rely on these stories leaking out from the military.
In which
funny that, isn't it?
Humanoid bodies were recovered with great difficulty. In another case that came to Stringfield, a witness claimed to have...
So this is still Stringfield. All these stories are still coming through this Stringfield. This one person. All these stories that could very easily be complete fabrications by the author himself. You know, you've got one person that Richard is basing all this stuff on. Stories from one person, one book author.
Seen 9 alien bodies at Wright-Patterson.
They're stacking them up, aren't they? You got to get the entire the population of an entire alien planet stacked up in a shed at Wright-Patterson at this rate.
Air Force Base in 1966. They were 4 feet tall. He added that the craft was also at the base, and at certain military bases there were mobile units ready at all times to recover downed UFOs. Yet another of Stringfield's witnesses, this was a doctor, he interviewed this man many times, and I'm
again, meaningless. So what? You know, the fact that he's a doctor, you know, and again, you know, lots of corporate psychopaths are doctors. He's talking about medical doctors. Fellow's occupation is meaningless.
Quite sure I've mentioned this doctor here on this program once or twice before. Nevertheless, he's an interesting and important person. He told Stringfield that he had autopsied an alien body himself.
Again, this is a story that's come through this one single author. This is a story that's come through this one single author. The author could have made it up. If this person actually told the author this story, you know, it could be a complete fabrication. Has he got a fingernail from one of these autopsies he did? Sliver of skin, possibly, that, you know, he got a bit of tangible evidence to actually prove these fanciful yarns. Fantastic yarns involving aliens. What was it Carl Sagan said? You know, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. There is no evidence whatsoever. It's all rubbish.
And gave Stringfield a great deal of information while they were in communication. Then that doctor just seemed to shut down and disappear. Very interesting. There were more witnesses. One was a contractor at Wright-Patt during the 60s, claimed to have seen 7 alien bodies under conditions of extreme security. Yet another, a former Air Force intelligence officer, said that back in 1948...
This is all still coming through the book author, remember?
He had seen a top-secret manuscript about a UFO crash.
Don't see any copies of the manuscript, do we?
In New Mexico, in which craft and bodies were recovered. Yet another witness, a radar specialist at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, told Stringfield that back in 1953,
radar guy told Stringfield, this same author, remember?
He had been shown a film of a crashed UFO in the desert, which
yeah, here we go again, you know, crashed UFO in the desert, not in the high street, in the desert. Now, why would a radar operator be shown a film of a crashed UFO? It didn't say the radar operator was actually involved in tracking it to the point where it crashed. I mean, they might have shown him a film if that was the case. It doesn't say that, does he? Just as a radar operator was shown a film. And again, this is a story that's come through this same book author, this Stringbean or whatever his name is.
Included the interior of the craft and dead alien beings inside a tent.
Yeah. But there's still, you know, there's not one shred of tangible evidence. You know, not one of these guys has said, look, here you go. Here's a bit of proof here. Here's a windscreen wiper off of a Mark 43 Arcturan scoutcraft. Here's a control knob off of the the Thrunge resonator. You know, that's part of the gravity drive system. I mean, where you set the actual amount of gravity you want to generate with a Thrunge generator. This is the knob you would turn, and here it is. There's none of that, is there? It's all stories. Stories, Richard. Stories. And so far, all of these stories have been filtered through one guy, a book author. Really, I mean, this guy. I've heard this guy referred to as a one of the best, or best known maybe, UFO researchers in the world. I think this is pretty poor research, Richard. What you're doing is not research, is it? You're reading a book and taking the author's word for it.
This individual had not been given any explanation or debriefing.
His facial expressions. I mean, he's telling this as though the story was told to him personally.
Regarding what he had been shown. I think it's very interesting that we've got this pattern in many cases.
Yes, we do. The pattern repeats itself over and over again. All these stories come through one book author, or another load of stories come through another book author. And none of them have a shred of tangible evidence. They're all just stories.
Of witnesses coming and stating dead bodies and craft at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which of course is the headquarters of the United States Air Force. In any case, Stringfield held on.
Again, meaningless. So what?
To these stories fairly quietly for a while, but eventually did publish them for the.
Yeah, he published them because he realised that he could potentially have a bestseller on his hands and he could make a few quid. And yeah, it's he probably wrote all these stories up while he was bored, sitting at home. You know, probably invented all these stories. You know, I can't tell you exactly who this witness was. You know, they want to remain anonymous, but this is the story. There was a couple of names bandied about there, but they ever checked out? Did these people ever exist? You know, who was the woman dying of cancer? I don't see any research being done here whatsoever. I see someone that likes touring around the world giving lectures, giving his opinion on a book written about it. This is not research, is it?
UFO research.
Moreover, it is not believable. It's absolutely, you know, what he's suggesting is just ridiculous. ET craft aren't going to come here and crash. The technology will be beyond our imagination. In the unlikely event that one did crash, it would be recovered by the ETs. We wouldn't be able to prevent that recovery. They're not going to leave technological and biological samples here for us to analyse. It's ridiculous.
Community, where they were debated pro and con for a while, and now.
Yeah, pro and con. Well, there's a lot of con going on, I think, in the UFO ET business. Anyway, that's as much of this as I can stomach. That's just a little bit more of Richard Dolan trying to bolster what he said a couple of weeks ago about UFO ET crash retrievals. And he's saying we should give him some credibility because some of the stories come from senators, generals and astronauts. Of course, that's completely meaningless. In fact, you know, you're going to be inclined not to believe a senator, I would think. Professional liars, politicians,
like the corporate psychopaths and push themselves up to high ranks in the military. I think it's proven conclusively by the fact that the general that the radio ham visited had a 4-foot bust of himself in his house. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough. Enough. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting and gave you a bit of food for thought. Be interesting to see if Dolan complains about this, because if he does, it sort of confirms that what he's spruiking, and that's what he's doing, doesn't stand up to the slightest scrutiny or criticism. It just falls apart at the seams, doesn't it? When you actually listen to what he's saying, it's rubbish. All right, well, as always, if you've struggled through the video all the way to here, jolly well done. And thanks for watching. Perhaps I'll catch you again.